Hi, everyone, and welcome to the thematic session number 2 on the role of organization of persons with disabilities in urban development and for building back, in the decade of action for building back better. Benjamin, if you can please share the PowerPoint. Great. So once again, welcome so much to the webinar on accessibility and the role of organization of persons with disabilities in building back better for and with everyone in the decade of action. I am Hannes Ylagelius, Program Officer for the Global Program for Inclusive and Accessible Urban Development at the World Blind Union, and I will be the moderator for this session. Next slide, please. Just for information, we will record today's session, and we assume your content for those who decide to stay in. So very quickly, the World Blind Union is a founding member of the International Disability Alliance. We are the global voice for the estimated 253 million persons worldwide who are blind and partially sighted. We consist of more than 250 organizations for and by persons who are blind and partially sighted in 190 countries. We have a very innovative initiative around urban development, which started in 2019 with a very ambitious goal. The new program comes with new working methods for the World Blind Union with a very clear and ambitious objective, really building on a multi-stakeholder partnership approach. The overarching goal of World Blind Union's global program for inclusive and accessible urban development is for World Blind Union members and partnering organization of persons with disabilities are effectively influencing the implementation of the new urban agenda, including on programs, policies, legal frameworks to ensure disability inclusion and accessibility for all persons with disabilities, in line with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It is with this program we are framing today's session, which will consist of 10-minute presentations and interventions from 7 speakers coming from our partners, allies, and who are our friends. In the end after the 7 10-minute presentations, we will have a roughly 15-minute segment for question and answers. And meanwhile, building up to that momentum, please do share your comments, thoughts, and questions to the panelists in the chat box. So we quickly move over to the first of our presenters today, my dear colleague, Mr. Benjamin Dard, who is the World Blind Union Senior Advisor for Inclusive and Accessible Urban Development. So the floor is yours, Benjamin. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. Hi, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining that session. I would like to frame maybe my intervention around 3 questions that Hannes kindly asked me to answer. And the first question is around why is World Blind Union engaging around the inclusive and accessible urban development? And why are we doing some work around those issues? And when it comes to that, I would like just to maybe do 3 main points around that particular question. I think the first one is around the rationale as to why we engage. I think there was a recognition of the urban trends and actually the increased discrimination faced by persons with disabilities, particularly people who are blind and partially sighted, and facing discrimination and barrier to access services, participate in life of their communities. I think when it comes to urban trends, there are some important things that we need to take in consideration. The fact that today more than half of the world's population is actually living in cities, and this is projected to increase by 70% by 2050. At the same time, we know that 1 billion people, or 15% of the world population, experience some form of disability, and that 80% of persons with disabilities are actually living in low-income countries. So basically, the conclusion is kind of like simple in the way that, if we do nothing to remove barriers in cities, then persons with disabilities will face increased challenges to actually, access transportation, public spaces, digital infrastructure, adequate housing, employment, health, and education. What we learned as well is that from the World Bank Union survey we did on the COVID-19 pandemic, we actually realized that 1 in 2 World Bank Union members surveyed during that COVID-19 pandemic actually specifically highlighted that mobility and transportation were the most critical challenges that they face in their communities, especially in times of crisis. So this gives a strong rationale to actually start working with cities and on the new urban agenda, as a tool to actually bring transformative change at the local level. Given that, we also realized that there is a urgency actually to act now and to engage with cities, to actually enter into a dialogue, to actually find inclusive, accessible, and green solution that can actually contribute to inclusive and sustainable communities for all. And this comes from the realization that actually cities are key drivers for development. Actually, they are the arena for addressing many of the challenges that we face today, whether it's actually extreme poverty, whether it's unemployment, whether it's climate change. Hence, we realized that taking part in those discussions at all levels, all those discussion and dialogue mechanisms that actually guide urban development were actually critical, because if we're part of those discussions, then we have a chance to influence policies, legislation, and ultimately bring accessibility to the ground, to the communities, and bring the CRPD into reality, basically. And the last one was around how do we do that? It's good that we can advocate, but ultimately, how do we do that? How do we move from the advocacy towards the more implementation aspects of things? And the fact that we have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the fact that we have the Agenda 2030, the fact that we have a framework like the Sendai framework for disaster restitution, and the fact that we have the New Urban Agenda, which is the roadmap for guiding the development of cities in the coming years. All of this basically provide us with the tools to actually confidently engage and start looking at how do we move that into practice. So I think this was a critical aspect. And since many governments, and there are many already responsibilities for governments at all levels, and for designers to actually implement accessibility as it's outlined in the CRPD as a precondition for inclusion, as a precondition to realize all the rights, basically, then we got also that chance to actually use the CRPD as a tool together with other development framework and humanitarian framework as well. When it comes to what do we seek to achieve for our programming, I think it's important that we highlight the fact that this program doesn't start based on nothing. It's basically just built on and complement the existing advocacy efforts that were led by World Bank Union members, but also by organizations of persons with disabilities globally, regionally, and locally. And what we want to do by focusing on the New Urban Agenda is really to support local implementation of the Agenda 2030 in line with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So what we did was really to design a program where we can ensure that all members, as well as our partner organization of persons with disabilities, can actually engage and influence the implementation of the New Urban Agenda. And this includes programs, policies, legal framework. And we do that through advocacy efforts to ensure inclusive and accessible cities through the whole aspect of program policies and practices. How do we do that? Basically, I think the first component is we do that by supporting leadership and engagement of World Bank Union and all partners, organization of persons with disabilities in different advocacy platforms, but also in the mechanism that guide urban development at all levels. And our friends and allies and partners that will be speaking today will highlight some of those actually components, whether it's the City for All network, whether it's through the different mechanism at the UCLG, whether it's through the General Assembly of Partner, whether it's through the program of smart cities led by G3 ICT and so on. The second point was and still remain one of the key points, and that kind of underlined the engagement, was to actually co-develop tools and resources. So we can actually frame accessibility and we can actually guide that advocacy and expertise moving forward. And one of the examples of that is the realization of the Accessibility Go, a guide to action, which is a guide that has been co-developed by World Bank Union and CBM Global Disability Inclusion. That is also one of our main partners as well in that. And I would say the engagement supported by tools and framework actually really allow to position organization of personalities and World Bank Union members are experts in their own right, so they can actually lead and guide those efforts. And that's where the engagement with key mainstream stakeholders to promote compliance with the CRPD, to actually ensure that accessibility universal design are mainstreamed within the work that city actually do, and not taken as a silo or as a separate issue, but really embedded into program and practice in line with climate action and all of these different development issues. And I would say when it comes to what is the main learning or takeaway message, so I think many of our panelists here today will have a lot to share as well from that journey. I would say if I focus on World Bank Union and the global program, I would say simply that this is not something we can do alone. And Hannes highlighted already at the beginning the importance of adopting a multi-stakeholder partnership approach. I think that would say the main learning is that if we want to work on accessibility, especially ensuring that accessibility is taken into account at local level alongside with other key development issues, I think it's key to work with a wide range of partners, whether it's like public, private stakeholders, academia, researcher, to actually ensure that there is an opportunity for dialogue to happen between organizations of persons with disabilities and those who are responsible for the different aspects of the work within development, whether it's designing policies, whether it's designing website, whether it's allowing building permits, whether it's designing green public spaces or public transportation. And I think this has been one of our main takeaway messages, that if we manage to have that global, regional and local community of practice where everybody is involved, then we get a chance to actually ensure that those perspectives are actually taken into account. And this requires also to adopt like a very cross-disability approach, so we can actually walk the talk on universal design, at the same time adopting an intersectional lens, so we can really celebrate diversity and ensure that no one is left behind. We got lucky because the New Urban Agenda is such a great tool for engaging into participation, and really engaging into the urban agenda really created the space for sitting at the table with other stakeholders, which, once you sit at the table, you really get a chance to start influencing agendas, policies, and practices. And the last point around that would be that when we work like in multi-stakeholder partnership approach, there is a need also for getting the adequate support, I would say, from donors and agencies and organizations. And I would say here, like the commitment from those organizations to inclusion and engagement of persons with disabilities is very, very critical. And I think the program is also the result, a combination of different organizations and agencies that really provided financial and technical support to allow World Bank Union to actually lead and also to be able to plan forward. And among organizations that really contributed to that, I would say, to that aspect from the beginning to as we are right now, includes DFID, includes International Disability Alliance, SIDA, includes the Swiss Development Corporation, and CBM Global Disability Inclusion. And I think the flexibility we had in terms of planning forward and deciding how do we want to take that program was really a key success in terms of ensuring that we can engage with all of you and all the different panelists and key allies that are here today. Thank you, Hannes.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. And I mean, one important point you really highlighted is that and I did as well, is that since we have really managed to take a multi-stakeholder partnership approach to how we work with through the World Bank Union, quite a new thematic or sectoral focus on urban development, that would not have been the results we see today had not been possible without great partners. Us really work together with the World Bank Union to support us to have a voice, not only for advocacy, but also not only because we are talking about why accessibility and disability and inclusion is important, but also how we can enact positive change. So it's been a tremendous journey. We have to move over to next presenter. Allow me to introduce Angela Moai. Angela Moai is the chief of the Human Rights and Social Inclusion Unit at the United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat. UN Habitat is one of the World Bank Union's closest partners within the scope of our global program for inclusive and accessible urban development. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have Angela here with us today to take us a bit through what is UN Habitat, a little bit about what is the New Urban Agenda, and what has been the journey for UN Habitat and the World Bank Union since we started our partnership. So with that said, over to you, Angela.
Thank you very much, Hannes, and thank you for inviting us to this very important forum. So, you know, we had a discussion this morning and we were saying, do people know about UN Habitat? And maybe not everybody, so it's good that we actually clarify who we are. So UN Habitat is the United Nations Program for Human Settlements, where our motto is working towards a better urban future. It is headquartered in Nairobi, but it's part of the UN Secretariat of New York. And so we are one of 3 UN agencies that are operating as a secretariat, but outside New York. So we have UNEP and UNON. And it's the agency mainly dealing with cities, municipalities, but as well as local, as national governments. So what is our mission? It's to promote socially and environmentally sustainable human settlements, develop human settlement development, and the achievement for adequate shelter and indeed housing for all. UN Habitat works very closely with partners to build inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities as per SDG 11. And we look at all types of human settlement issues, which includes housing, basic services, local economic development. So we have really a lot of issues, urban planning and design, spatial planning, and all that kind of thing. So that's what we really do. That's our bread and butter. In addition, UN Habitat is responsible for coordinating and implementing the UN system-wide strategy on sustainable urbanization. And we are the agency that leads the monitoring of SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, as well as the new urban agenda, which I'll tell you about a bit later. We, that is the Human Rights and Social Inclusion team, of which I lead, we are based in the Global Solutions Division, and under that is the Urban Practices branch. We look at the issues, cross-cutting issues, which are currently human rights, gender, youth, children, older persons, and people with disabilities, as well as the cross-cutting thematic issue of safety. So allow me to tell you a bit about the new urban agenda. It was adopted in 2016 in Ecuador, in Quito, and this became the Bible for all sustainable urbanization issues, because the new urban agenda provides global principles, policies, and standards, which were adopted by the entire UN system, which is very, very important. It is a roadmap for planning, design, development, and governance, and management of communities and human settlements, and serves as an accelerator of local action. We call it localizing the 2030 agenda, considering that 65% of the SDG targets require local actions. So it has to cascade down to the local level. So, you know, it enables the participation of historically marginalized groups, and we also call them priority groups, which includes people with disabilities, in areas of planning and development processes at the heart of the agenda. We believe in participatory processes that make sure we are as inclusive as possible in all interventions, in all policies, in all programs. The new urban agenda contains actually more than 12 references to persons with disabilities, and they clearly align with the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities, Article 9, which is very important. We do not work in isolation, we work within the mandates of the global agendas. And this document, the urban agenda, you can see its picture there, is available in multiple languages, audio format, and also in Braille. So the journey with UN Habitat and World Blind Union started with a very enthusiastic team from the World Blind Union who came to UN Habitat, and really, we saw the value of the partnerships between us, and Hannes was very instrumental. Thank God for his energy and coming across our corridors and saying we need to work together. The new strategic plan actually that started at the beginning of 2020, for the first time explicitly highlights persons with disability within the urban context as one of the cross-cutting issues. And I've mentioned other areas are human rights, gender, youth and children, and older persons, which we all speak about, but I think the UN disability inclusion strategy has really driven us to look at the category of people with disabilities, specifically in the urban context, as a real priority group. This agreement seeks to accelerate disability inclusion, universal design, and accessibility, which is very important for the World Blind Union and other agents and other organizations within the strategies, policies, and operations, in line with the global mandates, which have I mentioned before, the New Urban Agenda, the 2030 Agenda, the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, and the Convention of the Rights of People with Disability. And this partnership has enabled us benefit from the expertise across our normative and practical work, but also from a diversity of organizations of persons with disabilities and other stakeholders. And we really appreciate the partnership with the World Blind Union to be able to make programs and projects and policies that are disability friendly and have accessibility at the core of everything we want to do. We collaborated with World Blind Union in a number of areas, starting with the World Urban Forum number 10, which in 2020 was held in Abu Dhabi just before COVID struck us. So we were very lucky to have had that meeting just in time before we had to sort of work remotely, and we were all in person in Abu Dhabi. It led to the outcome declaration, capturing really concrete commitments towards accessible cities for all. Again, even in the middle of the pandemic, we didn't stop there. We partnered again with the World Blind Union to co-organize an expert group meeting on inclusive cities from the perspective of people with disabilities and indeed with older persons, but the people with disabilities was a key factor. And this was the first meeting that specifically provided sign language and closed captioning at UN Habitat. And it was a key milestone for us to be able to say, we mean what we say, and we are doing what we mean when we provide accessibility for persons with disability. The World Blind Union have carried out capacity building sessions on disability inclusion in the most recent human rights and social inclusion community of practice, which targets UN Habitat staff, both at the headquarters, in the regional offices and the country offices, so that they begin to understand, how do you do it? People do have the willingness, it's the how to do it that's really important, and this is what we are doing to build capacity in-house, and eventually we will go even to the partners. So we are very, very happy and excited to welcome World Blind Union's program officer as an independent expert, whose role and responsibility is to advise the executive director as part of the stakeholder advisory group enterprise, which we call SAGE. So this partnership, we hope it will continue to grow as we implement and agree on how better to do accessibility and inclusion in cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Angela. And it's really been a remarkable journey for the collaboration of the World Blind Union and UN Habitat. And I really remember our first conversations back in 2019, and really the spirit and excitement has lasted, because we know that together we are stronger if we take a very inclusive approach to work with different types of stakeholders, because we realize that we cannot make positive change. Sometimes we can do that alone, but the 99% everyone is needed on the boat. But of course, we cannot change the world during one day. Rome was not built in one day. I think Rome was built in 2. So of course, the future is always ahead of us, and we are really looking forward to, on the side of the World Blind Union, to continue the collaboration with World Bank Union, with the, of course,
UN
with
Habitat.
UN Habitat,
Right.
and scale up over time. We're very excited about that.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for taking your time to contribute to this session today.
Okay.
Without further ado, we will proceed to next speaker from the United Cities and Local Governments, Mr. Federico Battista Potier, who is the Accessibility Policy Officer at the UCLG, who is the global federation for the world, I think largest federation of the world's local and regional governments. And we are really excited to have Federico here today. He's been a close ally for the last years and a true supporter of World Bank Union's urban program. And we are really excited to hear more about the role of local and regional governments today, what UCLG has been doing around inclusive and accessible cities, and what has been your key lessons so far. So over to you, Federico.
Thank you, Hannes, and hello everyone from Barcelona. It's nice and sunny and warm. So first, just wanted to go into a little bit of thinking about that first question, the role of local and regional governments. So if we can go to that next slide. And just to give a little bit of context, we are the largest network of local and regional governments in the world, and really bringing that voice of local and regional governments to the global stage, but also bringing the global stage to our members, helping them align to a lot of the frameworks and understanding their role in the global sustainability and human rights debate and implementation. So with this role, I really see, and for our network, it's a lot from going from policy to action, right? So the alignment with these principles of human rights and sustainability are very important, making sure that the policies and programs that we're implementing at the local level really align to what the 2030 agendas is stating, or the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the New Urban Agenda, which connects a lot on with its commitments, 25 commitments to persons with disabilities and older persons, and the WHO's Age-Friendly Cities Network. Those are some of the ones that we're really pushing around the idea of inclusion and accessibility, and making sure that as we start to go through the training and capacity building with our members, that it also aligns really heavily with that human rights framework. And on the slide, I have an image of a cartoon with different people representing different ages, different races, different ethnicities, also representing different persons with disabilities next to this document that has rights on it. And I think it's so important to really promote that rights-based framework, because the aspects of cities that are so exciting are the diversity that's there. But many times we don't have systems to really promote the key that makes the city so attractive and that makes the city so innovative. And it's so important, that rights-based framework, to really harness the innovation in cities. And how do we create that alignment, and how do we take those actions? Some of the things that our members are doing already and that we're working with them is around the idea of adopting that explicit commitment to inclusion and a common understanding of universal design and accessibility. So making sure that it's not a kind of piecemeal, that inclusion doesn't mean something here and something there, but actually that there's a common framework and commitment to that common framework. And then promoting universal design as a common good and a core principle of sustainable development. And I want to go back to that because for us, accessibility is not only for persons with disabilities, it's really for everyone, whether we're looking at the lifetime of a city, you're looking at a young child, you're looking at young parents or older parents as well, or when you become an older person that maybe the city changes, your mobility options change, as well as looking at both the situational, the temporary, and the permanent disability. So disability is really a dynamic, and accessibility helps to ensure that that dynamic doesn't change the way that you access the city. Going from not only promoting, but realizing that accessibility constantly is getting better, right? We're looking at technology developments that bring a new range of possibilities for people who often couldn't go to work. So that's looking at the assessment of continuously of our municipal policies and programs and making sure that we have the capacity to support accessibility. Also creating and maintaining accessible platforms to communicate information, which we know was really critical from before, but in the pandemic came out a lot. And making sure that we're working together with the community. And this is a big thing that I would say is the key to the work with World Blind Union and other civil society partners, is ensuring that the community is involved in the planning and monitoring of urban transformation. And then the big thing, of course, data. I think data helps us really understand if we're doing well, how to improve. So regularly having local and disaggregated data on disability, age, and gender in cities and auditing accessibility. So we can go to the next slide. So our journey, it's hard to say when it began because we've had many engagements with, for example, World Enabled, the Disability Inclusive and Accessible Urban Development Network, and of course, World Blind Union. But to put it on paper, we'll say that our engagement and journey really started from the town hall process on inclusive and accessible cities. So this was a participatory process that we organized with civil society to really guide our agenda and put us, give us the recommendations that we need to foster to look forward to achieve equity and social inclusion. So on this slide, I have the title, the cover page of the Inclusive and Accessibility Policy Paper, which we did together in collaboration with the Disability and Accessible Urban Development Network, led by World Enabled, and which World Blind Union really fed into a lot of the recommendations. And next to that, we have the group that was together. Actually, Hannes is in the picture as well, in front of a sign that has hashtag cities are listening. That was the kind of name of our process, because we didn't only want people to listen to us, but we wanted to show that we were listening to our partners. And we also have this document in audio version in English, Spanish, and French, and an easy to read in English. And hopefully we can also do it in Spanish and French as well. And that document really goes into that enabling environment for equity and key recommendations that we're working on right now. So it was recommendations directly from civil society that are going straight to local governments, and local governments are adopting it and putting it together. And underneath, there's an image from that that policy paper, the easy read version, which I love easy read because it gives you a really visual context, which has two women dressed in business attire, shaking hands in agreement and in front of this backdrop of the world. And I think it's such a powerful image because it's really like leaders coming together and really agreeing on something to promote something that came from civil society directly. And I think hearing that voice and really bringing in the context of persons with disabilities, organizations of persons with disabilities, and older persons, and bringing that into the agenda around leaders who are making the decisions where budgets should go, where capacity should go, is so important. So the next slide. So one of the recommendations that came in the policy paper was for UCLG to put its capacity together and foster a global community of practice. And this global community of practice would be a space where our members could dialogue amongst each other and learn kind of best practices that they're doing, but also dialogue with other type of partners and really learn and take the learnings into what they're doing day to day on the ground. And so this slide has we have a logo for our community of practice, which is really similar to our UCLG logo of 3 squares, but it's the community of practice on inclusive and accessible cities and territories. Because we also deal with regions, and regions have their specific context. Whether you're looking at Latin America, where you have the really local, smaller city level, and then the municipality that kind of aligns the budgets through there. It's really understanding what are the dynamics in each context. And I have this quote, and I'm sure the next presenter, which is a good partner and friend from World Enabled, we'll go into this more, but we've aligned our definition of an inclusive and accessible city to a framework which says that it's a place where everyone, regardless of their economic means, gender, ethnicity, disability, age, and sexual identity, migration status, or religion, is enabled and empowered to fully participate in the social, economic, cultural, and political opportunities that cities have to offer. So a really important part is that we're not looking at accessibility as only disability mainstreaming, but disability mainstreaming and accessibility as resilience. And one of the great things to see about the community of practice is not only is it people advocating around disability inclusion, but many of the people working in the municipalities and the community of practice represent persons with disabilities themselves. And I think this even draws back to, it's not only putting policies to empower persons with disabilities or other groups to be involved in general society, but also in the municipality themselves and be agents of change in the future. And so I wish I could say more, but lastly, I just want to provide a little description, which is we have a photo here on the side with the different members of the community of practice. Right now, we have about 30 cities that are involved, representing cities from different regions, different contexts, a lot of them smaller size, intermediary cities. And they're all together smiling in this photo. And it was one of our first meetings, really coming together and putting our heads together to say, what do we need to learn? What do we need to implement? And how can we better involve our communities in what we're doing from day to day? So thank you, and look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Federico. Excellent presentation, and it's really been insightful to follow the years the years like since 2019, follow the journey of UCLG to really take a big leap forward when it comes to promoting accessibility, disability inclusion, universal design. Also with supporting you, of course, quite thrilling with the development and adoption of the policy paper you mentioned in one of your earlier slides. And it's absolutely amazing that the recommendations from that policy paper is now also yielding actions. Of course, we remain always open to support when you accelerate actions and the engagement of the community of practice. Because as we believe in this really peer-to-peer engagement, learning across cities, across regions, because some areas when it comes to accessibility are they are similar, but contexts always differ. So I always believe that different experiences can be mutually reinforcing to help each other to gain new perspectives on how they can take action in their municipalities and local government, so that we can truly build an inclusive and accessible future for everyone, where all have a role to play as their own agents of change. So without further ado, we will go over to our next speaker. Next speaker is Luis Arteaga, who is the Partnership Director at World Enabled. And today he's presenting with us today on behalf of Dr. Victor Pineda, the President and Founder of World Enabled and the Cities for All Network, mentioned also by Federico previously in the previous presentation, also known as the Global Network for Disability Inclusive and Accessible Urban Development. And I have to mention that Cities for All Network and World Enabled has really been instrumental for us to be here today, because they have been a great supporter of the World Blind Union when we started our global program, and who we have collaborated very closely for the World Blind Union new arenas, since we previously didn't work that much within the sector of urban development. And it's been a joy, and we're looking forward to take that partnership into the future. So without further ado, please, Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hannes. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to share this time with all these close partners, allies. We've been walking this journey together for a couple of years, and I hope I can elucidate this through my presentation. This is actually a story about partnerships, stakeholders, and the role that everybody needs to that everybody has a role in terms of advancing accessibility and inclusion in local governments and cities. And I want to give Dr. Pineda sends his apologies. He couldn't be here, but I will do my best to cover for him, which, as you know, if you know Dr. Pineda, is impossible, how charismatic he is. But So the Cities for All campaign is a campaign that has 3 verticals, and we shape it as a wheel, and we do first convenience and commitment, that's setting an agenda, data research, which is policy formulation, and training and advisory service, which is capacity building. And all this we do to shape policy making and implementation to build inclusive and accessible infrastructure. We're a platform. We believe we're a network of networks. And please, next slide. We set our foundation in 6 key principles, and this is a theoretical framework to mainstream inclusion and accessibility into local policies by using a framework that we call the Cities for All Global Compact. And these principles are non-discrimination, accessibility, participation, inclusive urban policy programs, capacity building, and data for development. Please, next slide. But how we got here is the important part, is the journey that we all done here. And we set global standards of inclusive urban planning, transportation, travel, and smart cities. When we say we, this is really important because we're really a platform of collaboration, and we're really glad to count with the World Blind Union, CVM, UCLG, our friends on UN Habitat, G3ICT, a lot of partners that are here in this event to have been shaping this standards on inclusive urban policy. And this journey, as Angela mentioned, started pretty much in 2016 with the formulation on the urban agenda, continue towards the revision of the new urban agenda and the World Forum 9, which we counted with the participation of many of the partners that I already mentioned. And inspired by that, the creation of the Diode network that Federico was mentioning before in 2016 triggered the launch of the Cities for All campaign in 2018 with the help, of course, of UCLG, World Blind Union, a founding signatory, and UN Habitat, and the help also of the German government. Other partners were also present, and that launches towards a path that took us to 2019, the World Assembly of Local Leaders, where we helped launch with UCLG the town hall of inclusive and accessible cities, and the policy brief that Federico was mentioning. Towards 2020, the World Forum 10. Last year, we collaborate with the network to do a COVID-19 equity and access live learnings, and we look forward to continue fostering this change towards inclusion and accessibility in local governments. Next slide, please. As you can see here, that's the launch of the Cities for All Goal campaign. That was December 3rd, 2018, International Days of Persons with Disabilities. And you can see Federico in the picture. Also, Mr. Jose Vieira, the president of the World Blind Union. Benjamin is also in the picture, and cities Sao Paulo, Amman, and Chicago, as well as Dr. Pineda. Next slide. So the Global Compact, as you said, as I mentioned, there's 6 principles. So far, we have over 20 cities that have signed. Some of the cities are New York, Chicago, Berlin, Amman, Sao Paulo, Rio, Curitiba, León, Helsinki, Barcelona, and Abu Dhabi. Those are some of the cities. There are diverse set of cities, the different sizes, different place in the journey towards inclusion and accessibility, which is a journey that we believe is something that needs to be shaped by collaboration. And we know the compact is not only signed by cities, but it's also signed by civil society organizations, academia, the private sector, and this is how we believe it should be. The 6 principles are symbolic, and also is shaped by by some commitments that the cities made towards furthering these principles. And we're working a little bit towards these 2 years that we have focused in advocacy in order to move to the next phase, which is tool-oriented, and also towards structuring a governance that would launch the Cities for All campaign to a more structured way to bring benefits to signatories and also fostering even more collaborations. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of number 19. That's the new the assembly local regional leaders with the facilitation of town hall inclusive and accessible cities. You can see this here the UN Special Envoy on Inclusion and Accessibility for the Secretary General, which has been an important part towards the support of has been an important supporter of the global campaign. You can see Hannes in the picture, also Federico and a couple other leaders. Next slide, please. That's World Urban Forum 10, February 2020. It feels like it was yesterday. And here we actually, that was the first time we combined the roundtable persons with disabilities within the World Urban Forum, also with signatories. There's official, so we have Abu Dhabi, Helsinki, Barcelona signing officially during the roundtable persons with disabilities, as well as many DPOs and other organizations which joined the campaign for have these symbolic commitments towards inclusion and accessibility. Next slide. And yeah, so I encourage you to actually join the campaign. It's you can access the campaign at www.citiesforall.org to align and catalyze local responses towards SDG 11, collect data, conduct research, disseminate best practices. We have been working this year towards moving from advocacy towards a more capacity-oriented campaign. So we're planning a launch of a training program. We have the first 3 modules in our website. If you wanna take a look, those modules are oriented in terms of the global principles, so that the first 2 principles are there to be accessed. There's also extra information, so that's good resources for the signatories and also for the community in general. So I encourage everybody to sign up, and thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please.
Thank you so much, Luis. A brilliant presentation. And I mean, from our side, as the viewers saw a few minutes ago, World Blind Union was, I do believe we were one of the first signatories to the Global Compact, Inclusive and Accessible Cities, as a global organization of persons with disabilities. Major commitment for an organization like the World Blind Union. But since we signed, it's really been an interesting journey, because after we also signed the compact, we have also worked with you in the Cities for All network. And as you mentioned before, the Cities for All network is, I would say, quite unique. Yeah, it's quite unique, because it's a multi-stakeholder sort of community of practice, a global, quite informal network, which has enabled organization of persons with disabilities, older persons, urban practitioners, some local regional governments, urban planners and designers, academia, and also the private sector, to really engage in peer-to-peer learning and exchange, really also giving persons with disabilities a voice to directly have dialogue with such stakeholders, which are sometimes very far from our regular business, perhaps even at the local level. So thank you so much. And without further ado, we have to go over to the next speaker. Next speaker is Mr. James Thurston, the Vice President of the Global Initiative for Inclusive and Accessible. No, sorry, I'm starting a bit tired here. Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs, and also the lead on these ICTs Smart Cities for All program, with whom we are a close partner with in the area of accessible smart cities. So without further ado, James, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hans. I'm really thrilled to be a part of this conversation with all of you today. I'm James Thurston. By way of descriptive introduction, I'm a white male with glasses. I have short gray hair. I'm wearing a kind of a blue-green teal shirt. I'm standing in my home office here in Washington, D.C. in the United States. I'm in front of a white wall with a few pieces of art from India. As Hannes mentioned, I'm vice president of G3ICT. We're an international nonprofit that was set up about 15 years ago with support of the United Nations, specifically to help countries implement the technology aspects of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And so we focus on issues of technology, digital transformation, inclusion, and how those impact the inclusion of persons with disabilities around the world. Hannes is on the advisory board for our cities work. We've got a global program that we started with partners about 5 years ago now, I think. And that program focuses specifically on cities. And I'll talk a bit more about that.
9 minuter.
Oh, excuse me? Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And thankfully, Hannes is on the advisory board for our work there. It's really important, these collaborations to us and really achieving the scale that we want and working with disabled persons organizations, with cities around the world to do that with partners like the World Blind Union. And it was great to hear Benjamin a bit earlier sort of lay out the case for why the World Blind Union is focusing on inclusion in cities. And I'll hopefully add to that case as well, because we think it's critically important for all of us to be working with cities on these issues of inclusion, and I'll talk about why. I'll also talk a little bit with you now about how we're working with cities around the world, also with civil society organizations, universities, technology companies, really all the kinds of organizations that are playing a role in how cities are using technology to support the broad range of services that we all get from our cities, and making sure that those services that are being delivered through technology, supported with technology, that they're actually working for everyone in that city, including persons with disabilities and older persons. So at G3ICT, we, and over the last several years, we've really started to define what we mean by an inclusive smart city. I use the term smart, and I'll define that in a bit. But we see sort of 5 dimensions or pillars, as we call them, that cities have to be aware of and working with in order to be both inclusive and smart at the same time. We know that technology is the backbone of smart cities, and that we often say that data is the lifeblood of smart cities. Cities are using both in a whole bunch of really innovative and creative ways. But those are just 2 of the 5 pillars and how we define what an inclusive smart city is. The other pillars, the other kinds of challenges that cities face today in being both inclusive and smart, are much more related to people and process. So not even necessarily directly dealing with technology and data. So a lot of our definition of what it means to be an inclusive smart city, while it absolutely is focused on technology and data, it's also focused on these people issues and these process and governance issues in cities. And I'll sort of lay out these 5 pillars of how we define what an inclusive smart city is. Before jumping into those definitions, I want to talk a little bit about some of the trends that have really informed our work with cities on being smarter, using technology, and also being more inclusive at the same time. We heard from Benjamin that our global future is urban. The demographics show that, and really our global present is urban already. Many of us know that, but we also know that the world is undergoing a really dramatic digital transformation. And this is happening in different ways in both the global north and the global south. There's more mobile subscriptions today around the world than there are people around the world. 70% of all youth in both the global north and the global south are online. We truly have a generation of digital natives who are very comfortable using technology, but also expect to be using technology throughout their day. There's more than 50 billion devices that are connected to the internet, not just your mobile phone and your computer, but all your bicycles, scooters, refrigerators, all kinds of things, watches, everything is connected to the internet now and talking to each other. And that has huge implications on inclusion of people with disabilities, including in urban environments. So this digital transformation is happening across all sectors and in all regions of the world. And cities are really at the leading edge of this. We know that they're investing trillions of US dollars in new technologies to support their critical services. I think one indication of this dramatic digital transformation of cities that sort of stuck with me is shortly before the pandemic hit and the lockdown hit, we were doing some work with Mexico City. And the IT department there shared with us that in Mexico City, the IT department itself was developing 25 new city apps every week to support the broad range of services that the city of Mexico City provides to its communities. And so really exciting, particularly if the development of those new apps to support services are accessible to people with disabilities. For us, what we mean by smart city, by the way, this is sort of important. There's a bunch of different definitions, but we like to use one by the Smart City Council. That is, a smart city uses information and communication technologies, ICTs, to enhance the livability, workability, and sustainability of cities. So I'd like to focus on ICT, but also the more human livability aspect of smart cities, that the technology is serving a purpose for human beings in those cities. And we sort of let cities opt into whether or not they're a smart city. If the city has a website and a mobile app and they want to be considered a smart city, we think that's great. We just want to make sure that even those technology deployments, those uses of technology are supporting greater inclusion and not less. And again, you can't really talk about smart cities without thinking about the built environment and transportation as well. These things come together very quickly with technology in cities, as many of you probably know. We also know that accessibility of these technology deployments matters. There's the technology supporting critical services by the cities through this massive digital transformation. Cities are deploying technology to support transportation and mobility for things like trip planning. They're deploying technology to support social services for things like unemployment benefits and housing benefits, all deployed with support of technology. Increasingly, cities and other governments are using technology across justice systems, so in policing and courts and jails, with huge implications for everyone, including people with disabilities, if that technology is not accessible. In museums, and we actually just finished a project with a bunch of museums in Russia on their digital transformation and inclusion, emergency preparedness and response. All of these areas are using technology. And what we want to make sure is that they're thinking about technology that is accessible and really works for everyone. And we know, unfortunately, that today, smart cities that are deploying technology are actually making the digital divide worse, not better for people with disabilities. At the start of our work with cities about 5 years ago, we did a global study and surveyed experts and did roundtables and really quantified how cities were smart cities that were using technology were not necessarily deploying technology in a way that worked for everyone. But we can fix that. And we are fixing that. So with these big challenges of making sure that technology is working for everyone, we set out to develop some tools. You can find those on our website, smartcitiesforall.org. But we also started to really define what are these 5 key dimensions of an inclusive smart city. And I'll just mention them quickly. There's more information on our website as well. The first pillar, the first dimension is strategic intent. Does the city have a digital inclusion strategy? Does it specifically reference different kinds of disability in that digital inclusion strategy? Does the city have a business case for its commitment to inclusion and accessibility? Does it look at positive return on investment calculations for how it's approaching the deployment of technology to support its services? What's the role of leadership and budget critically in the city? Those are all part of the strategic intent dimension that we look at. The next dimension or pillar that we look at, the second one is culture. How does the city's culture of innovation really support greater inclusion of persons with disabilities in the city, and employees of the city as well? We look at things like citizen engagement. Sort of core to smart cities is how the city is using technology to communicate back and forth with communities in the city? Are those citizen engagement channels accessible? Things like reporting potholes and broken street lamps. Can you do that on a platform that's accessible to people with disabilities? We look at things in the culture dimension, like culture of transparency. A key to being more transparent as a city is making sure that the information that you're putting out about city programs is accessible, that content, that information is itself accessible and deployed on accessible systems. And importantly, part of culture, we look at it, does the city have a culture of diversity? Is it hiring people with disabilities, which we think is critical to improved inclusion? And is it training people, employees across the city on disability and accessibility, and how? The third pillar we look at is governance and process. How is the city structured to support greater inclusion and accessibility? Is there a department that focuses on inclusion of people with disabilities, or even a manager? In the governance and process area, we look at things like procurement. How does the city know that it's buying accessible technology? Does it make accessibility a requirement in its tenders when it's purchasing new technology and systems? Importantly, where we've been doing some work with the World Economic Forum and the G20 Smart City Alliance, they are working with cities around the world to adopt 5 policies, model policies for smart cities. And one of those is focused specifically on procurement of accessible technology. So I would encourage you to check that out. Another area that we look at is metric and measurements. You can't really improve things in terms of being more accessible and inclusive in how you're using technology as a city if you're not measuring it, if you don't have quantitative metrics that you're looking at on a regular basis for continuous improvements. And of course, we look at technology and data. And here we look at things like, how does the city know if it's deploying technology systems that are accessible? What does it do when it finds out that they're not accessible? How is the city using data and technology to solve long-standing urban inclusion challenges? Here, just briefly, I'll mention an example that we think is pretty exciting. We've just started partnering with the University of Washington here in the US and with Microsoft and with 5 cities in the Americas to start using data and artificial intelligence to describe the thousands of miles of sidewalks, the accessibility features of thousands of miles of sidewalks in these 5 cities. 2 cities in Chile, Quito, Ecuador, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and the city of Los Angeles here in the US. And so that's a really great example of how you can use data and technology to improve the built environment really for persons with disabilities. The great thing about these 5 dimensions is that they also become part of a tool that we actually use partnering with cities to assess the cities, give them a score on 27 different variables in these 5 pillars that define what an inclusive smart city is, and allow them to benchmark against each other as well, to see how Los Angeles is doing against Barcelona or in that way. So they're pretty robust. This definition of what an inclusive smart city is really robust. And I'll sort of end with what I would say is a challenge, a bit of a challenge for all of us as we're working with cities, and really push our cities where we live. I live in Washington. I'm constantly pushing my city to be more inclusive and accessible, but really push the cities to think more about accessibility as it's deploying technology and smart solutions. And even more specifically, I like to give 3 sort of specific challenges that I encourage cities to do right away. 1, become familiar with these global ICT accessibility standards. Have your IT department or your CIO understand these. We actually have a tool on our website specifically on these 3 accessibility standards. 2, adopt a procurement policy like the one that the World Economic Forum and the G20 Smart City Alliance are promoting. And 3, consider doing some kind of an assessment. Doesn't have to be ours, but some kind of assessment that really helps you understand where your city is today in terms of being accessible and how you're deploying technology. So Hannes, with that, I'll stop and thank you again for inviting us to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, James. Very, I could try to summarize, but that will be impossible. I can try to comment, but that would take 2 hours, so I will refrain from that. But just one thing I will take with me, as you also highlighted continuously, is like, there can be no inclusive smart city, which is only digitally inclusive, if the city itself is providing an adequate level of accessibility for its residents. The think about a situation where maybe you can schedule an appointment at your doctor's or for a meeting, etc. But if you can't go there physically, that you are facing barriers on the way, providing a less nice, less fun experience, less seamless experience than your peers in the city, then it's not really meeting our required level of accessibility. So it can be digitally inclusive, but for it to be truly inclusive, all the different domains, as you outlined previously, has to be addressed. So thank you so much, James. And we are running a bit late now, so we have to move quickly over to the next speaker. Next slide, please. So the next speaker is our friend, Ms. Shivani Gupta, who is the founder and lead consultant at Accessibility in India, and also a dear member of the partner constituency group of persons with disabilities within the General Assembly of Partners. Yeah, and General Assembly of Partners is a multi-stakeholder network platform recognized in the preamble to the previously mentioned New Urban Agenda. So without further ado, Shivani, please take us away.
Thanks a lot, Hannes. So as a person with disability, as experts of our own rights, with our skills and experiences, we all have a role to play and shape the communities that we live in. And so there is a tendency that policymakers, planners, urban professionals have an unconscious bias regarding disability, inclusion, and accessibility as a result of lacking awareness about accessibility and universal design, resulting in budgets, plans, designs not being considered. Though practices greatly vary between and within countries, there is a tendency that there aren't robust systems for us to engage and contribute. We also have a role to support each other to build our own capacity and accelerate influence. So presently we have the global frameworks, including the UNCRPD, the SDGs, and New Urban Agenda that have opened a lot of avenues for us to engage, though our representative organizations through our representative organizations at global, regional, national, local level with the government and other stakeholders. Our engagement around inclusive and urban development at all levels means addressing inclusion and accessibility as a part of a broader developmental agenda, such as climate action. We advocate for inclusive and accessible cities being seen as a part of the broader issues such as climate action and sustainability, etc. So on the screen right now, there is a picture of a triangle with 3 levels of engagement that I'm going to be talking about, which is at the global level, regional level, national level, and the local level. So a great example at the global level, a great example of broad participation in discussion guiding the implementation of the New Urban Agenda is the partner constituency group of persons with disabilities in the General Assembly of Partners, GAP. GAP is a multi-stakeholder platform with 17 constituency groups, which are recognized in the New Urban Agenda Declaration in 2016. Engaging in this group has meant that we have had chances to contribute to policies and normative work. For instance, the UCLG and the UN Habitat, something that our previous speakers already talked about. This group, through this group, experts from organizations of persons with disabilities were able to have a delegation at the World Urban Forum 10 in 2020. The group worked with many partners here today, which enabled us to host and be engaged in numerous training events, dialogues, network sessions, and mainstream urban development actors. For example, on transport, public spaces, accessibility in smart cities, and inclusive planning. I was a part of the delegation, and in spite of having worked in inclusive design in India and other Asian countries for over a decade, the experience of participating in the World Urban Forum 10 gave me newer perspectives and deeper understanding of the importance of our engagement at the global debates and actions, and how that can be brought into the national and the local level for implementation. At the regional level, there are regional urban forums, which are often convened by the United Nations Economic and Social Commission and UN Habitat and regional action plans for the implementation of the new urban agenda. At the national level, there are several opportunities for engagement for persons with disabilities and OPDs. Many countries have a national urban forum leading up to the World Urban Forum. Countries are doing reporting on the new urban agenda implementation. Shadow reporting on the UNCRPD has opened spaces to address accessibility and barriers according to Article 19. Countries are also doing voluntary national reviews on their implementation of the SDGs. Civil societies are often doing shadow reports, and in 2022, SDG 11 on inclusive cities will be reviewed, which is going to be a great opportunity for us to monitor the progress. Then, in addition, national urban policies are increasingly developed in many countries to guide urban planning and investment. UN Habitat is supporting states on this, and involvement of marginalized groups is at the heart of the process, meaning that OPDs should have a clear role in this. At national level, OPDs can play a role to support development, implementation, monitoring of legislation, regulation, accessibility standards to ensure that they align with the UNCRPD. We also have a role at the national and local level to partner up with other stakeholders to influence with, for instance, authorities that issue building permits, broadcasting boards, and ICT license, engineers, architects, or urban planners, service providers, members of the academic community, and so on, to ensure that disability inclusion and accessibility can become a prerequisite for sustainable development across urban policies, systems, programs, and practices. We also have a role for collaboration and financing between ministries, agencies, departments for national, regional, and local development and awareness raising. Monitoring to ensure development policies and programs, including those related to housing, slum upgradation, smart cities, transport, and mobility, to ensure that they have indicators that monitor disability, inclusion, and accessibility. Then at the local level, our governments are leading the development of our communities, and they are closer to where we live. As local residents, we should advocate to have a say on how accessibility is realized where we live. We should also hold them accountable. And we have a role to raise awareness about accessibility, what accessibility is, its benefits for the community development, its role to improve resilience, to mitigate the impact of disasters and so on. We can also establish partnerships at the local and with the local and regional governments to provide technical expertise in their planning and design processes so that what is being done actually addresses our requirements and barriers. Then in addition, there are voluntary local review, and more countries, more and more cities are doing these voluntary reviews on the implementation of the SDGs. And this enables stakeholder dialogue on alignment of local policies and practices towards reaching the SDGs. Stakeholder engagement is at the heart of the SDGs, and the voluntary local review process should also provide an opportunity to engage locally. A common challenge often emphasized by the government is that there is a lack of reliable data on disability inclusion and accessibility barriers, which hinder them from making investments. We can support how data can be collected, but also share our own experiences and evidence from our lives so that the investment can be made even more, so that the investment can be made actually without any flaws. From my experience from working on accessibility in India at the local level is that commitment and energy of organizations of persons with disabilities at the national and local level bring to the planning, monitoring, and implementation process, making the efforts that come out of it more impactful, and it also increases the transparency of the project. Thanks, Hannes.
Thank you so much, Shivani. Excellent. And it's really amazing to see the different and get the taste of all the different avenues which exist for organization of persons with disabilities, different constituency groups and different organizations to really engage in the implementation of the new urban agenda from the global level down to the very local level. I mean, one thing I just like to make a comment on is your explanation regarding the partner constituency group of persons with disabilities. And it's really an amazing mechanism for different experts or persons with disabilities from different representative organizations to play a role at the global level for peer-to-peer learning. But what we did regarding the World Urban Forum 10 last year and with the PCG really allowed us to work together with the International Disability Alliance, IDA and IDDC Bridge Program alumni, who are really experts, who come from all around the world, really providing a great diversity around surrounding advocacy efforts and also policy advice and support to, for example, UN Habitat and UCLG. And I believe that some points made during the presentation also answer some of the questions we have seen coming in the chat on how we can really engage at the local level or what accessibility is. One question came in and was responded to by Federico previously on if there is not a really common understanding of what accessibility is, what can be done. And I think Shivani provided some tangible recommendations. In addition to that, Federico also reiterated that one can take great help from the UCLD policy paper on inclusive and accessible cities. But I also like to highlight the World Blind Union and CBM Global Disability Inclusion, a quite fresh guide called Accessibility Go, a guide to action, which defines, which also outlines accessibility across various domains. But we also have to proceed quickly to our last speaker. Our next speaker is Jesus Hernandez, who is the Director of Universal Accessibility and Innovation at the ONCE Foundation. And it's really, I'm really excited to have you here today to really hear about your work, but also, of course, to learn about your commitment to be here and also support World Blind Union's global program for inclusive and accessible urban development. So without further ado, please take the floor. And for others, Jesus will be speaking in Spanish. So if you need interpretation, please select that alternative in the bar in Zoom. Thank you. Over to you, Jesus.
Oh, thank you very much, Hannes. As you told, I am going to speak in Spanish to support this amazing language. Nosotros del Grupo Social 11 llevamos trabajando en accesibilidad desde que nacimos, llevamos toda la vida. 32 años desde la Fundación 11 trabajando en temas de accesibilidad con un enfoque muy universal, con un enfoque muy holístico. Y desde el primer proyecto que me gustaría hablar es un proyecto que iniciamos en el siglo pasado, en los años 1990, 89-90, firmando un convenio de colaboración con el ministerio que llevaba los asuntos sociales en aquel momento, con el Instituto de Servicios Sociales, con el IMSERSO. Probablemente fue la colaboración público-privada más importante a nivel europeo, probablemente a nivel internacional, en materia de accesibilidad. Fue un convenio de colaboración en el que, utilizando fondos estructurales, fondos europeos, fondos de desarrollo regional, financiábamos obras en ayuntamientos para que promovieran la accesibilidad. Durante los años 90 el enfoque de la accesibilidad estaba muy centrado en eliminación de barreras arquitectónicas, urbanísticas y del transporte. Por eso la mayor parte de los fondos fueron destinados a la ejecución de obras, a desarrollar proyectos de accesibilidad .
And we have unfortunately encountered a technical hiccup. We're trying to reconnect with Jesus. We are very sorry for this. Okay, so I mean, meanwhile waiting for us to reconnect with Jesus, coming back to one of the previous questions of how can we engage locally when also governments have maybe a different definition and understanding as us with accessibility. So I like to, I know that Federico also answer to that question in the chat, but it would be great if Federico can also share his reflection and experience around this with the UCLG and the different member cities you have, if possible.
Yeah, of course, Hannes. For me, it's really interesting because you would be quite surprised because we have different cities, different cultural contexts, different sizes, different capacities. You know, we have a city like New York in the community of practice, but we also have cities like Banjarmasin in Indonesia. Interestingly enough, though, by really aligning the frameworks in this policy paper, and also as Luis had mentioned earlier with the Global Compact, around some key principles, gives the cities this kind of connection to what they really want to achieve, which is, I would say, like as basic as it sounds, they really want a way for their citizens and the residents as well, not only citizens, residents, and visitors to feel a part of the city. And there's a little bit of, you know, I guess, a positive competition between the cities of wanting to be the most friendly or the, like I like to say, the most accessible. And so having this kind of common framework when cities ask you or local leaders ask you, what does it really mean, you know, inclusion and accessibility, and having something clear that kind of unites them all together, although you have to look at the cultural context, does create a common definition. So we know that we're working with the international framework on accessibility from the convention, and we're uniting it with key indicators. So when we are monitoring it later, we can understand where we've reached. So I think those kind of things help that understanding. But I would say it's quite lucky because this work, I really feel that there's a lot of will wanting. There may not always be capacity and there may not always be the budget, but there's a lot of will to get started. So aligning with those commitments has actually been the most simple task, because everybody wants to align with those commitments. Achieving them is the part where we're trying to really help the cities and bring different partners to provide that capacity building and provide that training, so that they can step by step, you know, get there to whether they're a city like Mersin in Turkey, or a city like Sao Paulo that has a lot of capacity and a lot of development around accessibility. So short answer. I see there's a question in the chat. I don't know if I should answer it. I'm always really hesitant to say this, which are doing great advances on inclusion accessibility, because there's really a lot of cities that are doing a lot of diverse things. You know, there's some cities doing really great stuff on housing, where, you know, retrofits of house are covered by the municipality. There's really cities doing a lot on technology. So I'm hesitant to say it also because of the constituency that we represent, because I really generally and honestly feel that there's a good connection. There's a lot of great work that's going. So you can see cities like, you know, Barcelona are doing really great, but also, you know, Banjarmasin, there's a lot of data. So, anyway, that's just short.
Thank you so much, Federico. And yeah, and I mean, it's really not easy to say who are the best or who have the best practice, etc. Definitely, but thank you for sharing your opinion. It seems we are slowly or quite fast running out of time, and at least from my side, I cannot see that Jesus Hernandez from ONSA has managed to reconnect. But of course, this is not the end of the world, so we will also include Jesus' points and speaking points when we plan to also share the presentation to those who like to get that along with the recording. We are very sorry for this. And of course, we will also include the experience of ONSA, one of I think the biggest member of the World Blind Union, national member of the World Blind Union, in upcoming events and webinars to really learn about their unique experiences around universal accessibility and the different private-public partnership, as he's earlier mentioned. I just get its text from...
Hannes, I am back. I am here
Okay,
again.
you're back. Thank you so much.
I don't know what happened, but suddenly Zoom switched off and went out, and I couldn't reconnect. But if it is possible, I would like to continue where I live. Okay.
Definitely, that's very fine by me. Can the technical support confirm if we can still use this meeting room for a few more minutes? So to allow Jesus to finalize his presentation.
Okay, so I continue.
Yes, please.
Yo estaba hablando del convenio Imserso y Fundación 11, que fue un convenio más importante que ha tenido nuestro país y probablemente a nivel mundial por el volumen de actividad que hemos tenido. Fue un acuerdo de colaboración con el Ministerio de Asuntos Sociales en el que movilizamos unos 220 millones de euros durante unos 20 años a través de subvenciones directas a ayuntamientos. Estas subvenciones directas iban destinadas a realizar obras de accesibilidad en municipios. Los ayuntamientos tenían que enviar un proyecto de accesibilidad a nuestra fundación y al Imserso, en el que nuestros equipos técnicos analizaban esa documentación, ese proyecto para ejecutar obras, con lo cual conseguimos dos grandes objetivos. Uno, promocionar las obras de accesibilidad, generar una cultura de accesibilidad dentro de los ayuntamientos, pero probablemente lo más importante fue la formación de los técnicos municipales. Y de esto hablaré un poco más adelante porque es una carencia muy importante la falta de formación que tienen los profesionales en materia de accesibilidad. Todavía en nuestros días siguen arquitectos, ingenieros finalizando sus carreras universitarias y no saben de accesibilidad. Pues en aquellos momentos, durante la década de los 90, durante la década del 2000 hasta el 2011, que fue cuando finalizó este convenio, conseguimos generar cultura de accesibilidad en más de 800 municipios, y esto ha tenido un impacto muy importante porque ya a partir de ahí el resto de obras que se han ido ejecutando en las ciudades han ido implementando, incorporando a la accesibilidad. Esto no significa que ya esté todo resuelto, esto no significa que los problemas de accesibilidad en España estén resueltos, ni muchísimo menos. Todavía nos queda muchísimo por avanzar, todavía nos queda muchísimo que trabajar, todavía es necesario sensibilizar a muchas áreas de la sociedad, tanto a nivel político como a nivel técnico, a nivel de profesionales, a nivel de empresa, a nivel de ciudadanía. Nos queda un gran camino por recorrer. Pero a través de este convenio de colaboración, como digo, sí le dimos un impulso a nuestro país hasta conseguir que en estos momentos España, gracias al impulso del Grupo Social 11 y del Imserso y los ayuntamientos, con los fondos estructurales a los que hacía referencia antes, fondos europeos de desarrollo regional, conseguimos revertir una situación bastante complicada, bastante deficitaria en nuestro país. Y esto viene avalado por los ganadores, los finalistas en los premios Ciudad Europea Accesible, los Access City Award, que promueve todos los años la Comisión Europea y en los que ciudades españolas tienen una situación de primer nivel. Somos las ciudades españolas, o España es el país de la Unión Europea que más ciudades tiene como finalistas, ganadoras, menciones especiales, etcétera, ¿no? Con lo cual, esto avala el trabajo que hemos venido desarrollando durante todos estos años. Otro de los elementos en los que hemos hecho un esfuerzo muy importante, hacía referencia antes, a formar arquitectos, formar ingenieros en informática, ingenieros de software, ingenieros de telecomunicaciones, pero a profesionales en general para que cuando salgan de la universidad, cuando terminen su carrera, realmente hayan incorporado la accesibilidad en sus conocimientos técnicos para que en un futuro, cuando desarrollen su actividad profesional, puedan incluir el diseño para todos, la accesibilidad universal de forma normalizada, de forma transversal, de una forma completamente alineada con un ejercicio profesional de alto nivel, de alta calidad. Porque así es como entendemos la accesibilidad, ¿no? Cualquier entorno, producto o servicio que no sea accesible, no podemos decir ni que es de calidad ni que es sostenible, porque en un futuro habrá que cambiarlo para realmente hacerlo accesible y que tenga en cuenta las necesidades y cumpla con los derechos, o sea, de respuesta a los derechos de toda la ciudadanía. También estamos trabajando con colegios profesionales para que aquellos profesionales que en su momento no tuvieron formación en materia de accesibilidad podamos o puedan ser formados en estos momentos. Para ello firmamos convenios de colaboración con colegios de ingenieros, con colegios de arquitectos, a través de los cuales damos cursos de formación. Estamos muy involucrados a nivel internacional, muy especialmente a nivel europeo, en el desarrollo de estándares. Desde España hemos liderado un mandato que me mandató la Comisión Europea, el mandato 420, para desarrollar el estándar, el 17210, el estándar que desarrolla la accesibilidad en las compras públicas en entorno construido. Y eso ha sido un avance muy importante. Hemos conseguido realmente que a nivel europeo la accesibilidad tenga el mismo significado, que en cualquier país europeo podamos utilizar un estándar, una herramienta de altísima calidad técnica en materia de accesibilidad para poder implementar e incorporar todas las cuestiones relativas a esta materia en cualquier construcción, en cualquier obra pública. Asimismo, estamos potenciando el turismo accesible de una forma clara. Ostentamos la vicepresidencia de la European Network for Accessible Tourism, la ENAT, la que estamos promoviendo el turismo para todas las personas de una forma clara. Como decía, siempre estamos trabajando desde un punto de vista holístico, tanto en la gestión municipal, en cualquier gestión de tipo política, en cualquier gestión de tipo administrativa, como en cualquier ámbito empresarial. Esa visión global que tiene en cuenta las necesidades de todas las personas, independientemente de cuáles sean sus capacidades funcionales. Y en estos últimos tiempos estamos haciendo énfasis en aquellas accesibilidades que se habían olvidado, se habían dejado aparte, como puede ser la accesibilidad cognitiva, en la que estamos dándole un impulso muy importante. Y para ello la tecnología puede ayudar de forma clara. Para nosotros también es muy importante involucrar a los usuarios en todos los procesos de desarrollo de planes estratégicos o procesos de innovación. Porque los usuarios somos los que mejor conocemos cuáles son los problemas reales y también conocemos cómo es la forma de poderlos resolver. Desde Fundación 11 y en el Grupo Social 11 tenemos un equipo multidisciplinar de profesionales, somos expertos en accesibilidad, estamos formados en accesibilidad y llevamos muchísima experiencia en esta materia, pero además muchos de nosotros tenemos algún tipo de discapacidad, por lo que conocemos muy bien también cuáles son los problemas, ¿no? Y por último, como veo que Hannes se conecta, voy a ir finalizando, creo que es muy importante que tengamos en contacto, o sea, ahora mismo en cuenta, la tecnología, cómo la tecnología puede o incluirnos o excluirnos en función de cómo esté desarrollada, cómo esté implementada. Pero también debemos tener en cuenta que la tecnología no va a resolver todos los problemas, que la tecnología debe de avanzar en materia de accesibilidad de una forma paralela a la eliminación de barreras arquitectónicas, es decir, la accesibilidad al entorno construido y la implementación de la tecnología deben de trabajar de forma conjunta, de forma paralela, para resolver los problemas de accesibilidad que en estos momentos nos encontramos o que en un futuro seguiremos encontrándonos. Muchísimas gracias a todos por habernos invitado a este panel y lamento los problemas de conexión con los que nos hemos encontrado. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Jesus, and really insightful and very, very interesting presentation. So unfortunately, we'll not have time to comment further, but I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you all, Jesus, Federico, Luis, Shivani, Angela, and Benjamin, and all of those who have been part of this webinar today to really have made it a success. Feel free to reach out to me, Hannes Julien Lagelius, in the World Blind Union. By entering the World Blind Union website, you will find my connection details here. If you like to learn anything more about what we have been discussing today, if you like to reach out to the separate speakers and to access those resource materials and guides we have been mentioning today, feel free to reach out at any point and we'll be happy to help you. So by saying that, thank you so much for attending and asking very thoughtful and insightful questions today. And we are happy to see you again next time and throughout the World Blindness Summit this year. Thank you so much and have a great evening and afternoon. Thank you.